Team Innovation, you guys are up now from South Africa.
Good afternoon to the Board of Directors, stakeholders at large, protocol observed. Before we begin our presentation this afternoon, we'd like to thank you for spending your time to come and listen to our presentation on the automotive conglomerate Volkswagen. Without any waste of time, we are Team Innovators from the African Leadership Academy, and my name is Mpho.
My name is Chimuanya.
And my name is Skylar, Montague.
And in this presentation, we'll be discussing VW's 5 most crucial issues, analyze them, and ultimately give insight into top 5 business recommendations, which we argue will ensure both growth and financial sustainability for the group. Without any further ado, Chimu, something in me tells me that you know exactly how we prioritize our issues.
Absolutely, Mpho. Thank you very much. So we have prioritized our 5 main issues based on financial impact. The first issue that we have is product portfolio rationalization, which talks about VW's complex portfolio. Secondly, we have strategy and cost optimization, which looks at how VW is trying to cut costs in order to remain profitable. Next, we have Paris Accord and environmental legislation, which talks about how VW has failed to meet CO2 emission requirements. Next, we have e-mobility strategy, and this talks about how they are questioning if electric cars are profitable in the nearest future. Finally, we have strategic sourcing of cobalt, and this talks about how VW is at risk of how VW considers the risk while obtaining cobalt from illegal sources. Skylar, what do you have for us?
Looking at the SWOT analysis, their strengths include a global reach of over 150 countries, as well as that they're competitive across a wide range of divisions. And lastly, they benefit from economies of scale. Opportunities include the fact that they can still expand into over 30 different countries, and they can do further research into the electric car markets. Considering their weaknesses, we realize that they have a tarnished reputation due to the diesel scandal. What this means is that this could reduce their future profits and potential partnerships in the future. Looking into the threats, they face stiff competition from other companies such as Tesla, Ford, and Toyota. As well as that, emissions regulations may risk their long-term profitability. Looking into the first issue, we have product portfolio rationalization. So as we know, VW has 12 different car brands across 6 different divisions. And it is argued that if they're able to simplify their product portfolio, they'll be able to unlock a total of 160 billion euros. And because cars in the premium and super premium divisions are producing the highest gross profit, over 8 billion euros, we argue that they focus on the production of these cars while limiting the production in the volume division, trucks and buses division, and turbo and rank units. This is because the volume division is 90% less profitable than the other divisions. This is partly due to the fact that their factory overheads are over 3 billion euros more than the other divisions. And we argue that if they focus on fewer divisions, they'll be able to accelerate the product development in the current divisions, which will allow them to stay competitive in the market. What this means is that the money that is gained from the simplification of their portfolio will be able to be transferred towards modular electric technology to meet the CO2 regulations. And we'll be talking about this a little bit more later on in our presentation. As well as this, they'll be able to tap into the hidden 160 billion euros.
Now onto our second issue, strategy and cost optimization. Volkswagen is considering 2 ways of remaining profitable, cost optimization and narrowing down their target market. As referenced in the first issue, we said that we recommend that Volkswagen should sell their volume market and focus on the premium and the super premium market in order to tap into the 160 billion hidden value. The second recommendation that we have is that Volkswagen should centralize their functional units, as this will allow them to save 28 billion euros. If they do this, they'll be able to transfer direct and overhead costs from the volume segment to the premium and super premium segment worth 3.5 million euros. Also, they'll be able to save 6% of costs, which include cost of sales, admin expenses, and selling expenses.
In 2016, a wave of regulatory standards on car emissions was put into action across all 12 car brands of Volkswagen. What this means is if these regulations are not met, a flat fine of 600 million euros will be fined to Volkswagen. After 5 years, this will be a whopping 3 billion euros, and after 10, 7 billion euros due to the exponential growth of the fine. Even more detrimental, Volkswagen's reputation can continue to plummet after the diesel scandal if they are unable to redeem themselves. If they're looking for short-term profits, they have two different options. They can either take no action or only reduce the volume, only modify the cars in the volume division to be below the threshold. This will give them the maximum net present value of €2.2 billion, 2 million euros, excuse me. However, this still means that they have to pay the €600 million fine. They won't be able to produce and sell cars in their most profitable divisions, and they'll neglect their fifth KPA, which could fuel further investigations into the diesel scandal because they're not improving their reputation. So what we recommend is that they spend more in the short term to ensure long-term profitability in the future. This means that they invest 19,500 million euros to implement MEB technology to modify all divisions to be under the threshold. Well, the money gained from portfolio simplifications can be channeled to fund this. In the short term, they'll have their most negative present value, which we understand is one of the cons. However, in the long term, this means that they will not incur the €600 million fine. They'll also continue to be able to sell cars across all divisions all over the world, and they'll help their corporate social responsibility to help put to the side the diesel scandal. During the 8-month period that is required to build and commission the new models, what they can do is they can channel the already produced cars that are above the CO2 threshold to the African continent, to countries that have a high GDP and also have more loose regulations on CO2 emissions.
The next issue centers around VW questioning the future profit potential of the electric car market, and in turn causing the conglomerate to adjust their 2025 e-mobility strategy, and in turn also reducing the amount of the EVB borders. We argue that if this is not addressed, competitors such as Tesla will remain market leaders in this respective market, further limiting VW's capability of penetrating this market in the near future. Additionally, we argue that failure to implement the 2025 e-mobility strategy may prevent from the progression of the research and development of the modular electric drive matrix. Our recommendation here, ladies and gentlemen, is that VW should reject the 3 bids offered by the 3 suppliers and take a 3-year contract with Panasonic, as this is justified by our calculations, as we show our calculations which encapsulated the linear increase in production units, as we argue that this will save Volkswagen a whopping $1.1 billion in the near future, allowing the company to acquire affordable, high durability and high quality batteries, and in turn becoming competitive in this respective market. This of course links to VW's KPI number 5, which is entitled Boosting the Strategy Development Capabilities and Expanding the Mobility Services. Our last issue delves into VW's ethical dilemma of strategically sourcing cobalt in the DRC. The group currently needs 55,000 metric tons of cobalt in order to meet the target set by production costs, which increases by 25% each year. We argue that, however, due to the profit maximization objective, the group found themselves dealing with illegal artisanal miners who, despite selling the cobalt at a lower price, could not meet the target set by VW. Additionally, we argue that by dealing with artisanal miners, this could lead to further tarnishment of the reputation and other key stakeholders on a global scale. Our recommendation here is that VW should get its resources from legal mining companies in the Glencoe, as this will, one, save their brand reputation, which is already at risk. 2, all legal companies are held to certain regulatory standards, which will ensure that VW gets value for its money. Last but not least, given the massive product portfolio of VW, we argue they will benefit from economies of scale, which will allow them to buy the same quality of cobalt at a cheaper price. Chimu, take them with our conclusion.
So now we're down to our conclusions. We have 5 main recommendations. First being to centralize all the functional units of the group to save a total of 28 billion euros. Secondly, we ask that Volkswagen should slim down their product portfolio and focus on the premium and the super premium segment. Third, we say that Volkswagen should sign a contract with Panasonic and invest in MEB matrix drive. The fourth one is that Volkswagen should invest 19 billion euros in producing cars that will be able to meet the CO2 emission regulations. The last recommendation is that Volkswagen should also get their cobalt from legal suppliers.
Judges and the audience, thank you for lending us your ears. We've come to the end of our presentation, and now pass on to questions with the judges. Thank you.
Thank you for a very engaging presentation. You're all very strong speakers, so well done for that. I just have a clarifying question, please. So just so I understand you correctly, what you're saying around the emissions targets is that it's a partial measure, that you're only going to be focusing on some of the segments, not all of them. Please, will you just make that a bit clearer for me?
Yes, so because our issues are integrated and we are looking to move away from the volume segment and only focus on the premium and super premium segments, those are segments that are above the threshold at the most. So we want to modify those segments by implementing MEB technology, which will be below the threshold.
So a follow-up question is that it will take a while to move away from the volume segment. That's not going to happen overnight. And with Dieselgate, with other issues, and very interested and informed investors, is that a risk that you think will give you what you want in the not only the short run, but in the medium to long run?
We definitely see that it's a risk, and that Volkswagen was built off the idea that they were the people's car, right? However, we truly believe that companies are constantly growing and innovating, hence our name. So because of that, we believe that it's time for Volkswagen to take the next step and only focus on the premium and super premium divisions. In the meantime, when they are moving away from the volume segment, they'll tunnel those cars to the African continent.
What ethical issues could arise with your approach that you're suggesting, with everything, with great innovation and taking risk? There is reward, but there's also these challenges that need to be mitigated. What are some of the risks you may need to think about a bit more around, shipping the cars to the African continent, and they're the ones who are not meeting emissions targets?
I think the key thing, we're considering two things. So ideally, we don't want to be known as the company that basically took most of its cars that are beyond the emission scanner to exploit the African continent. But idea is thinking of from a business perspective, the idea is that they already have manufactured cars within these regions. So already taking them back into the factory and modifying that is a lot of cost. So we do know that currently if we move them to the African continent, we will still be able to make money off that. That means that we cease production, any further production of these volume segments, and then figure out ways in which we can make them comply. But those which are already manufactured, we're not going to take them back and then fix them, and we're just going to change our focus into the African continent. The third thing was also thinking around the fact that a lot of African countries in the super premium may not even afford, so customers, yeah? So we're thinking around countries with a lot of higher GDPs, for example, Nigeria, South Africa, very strong economies with people that can afford such cars. So which is why we're thinking which other African countries on the continent can basically afford the cars in these segments. That was how we went around our thinking.
And just to add on to that, to answer your question, yes, there are definitely some implications of doing this. The brand reputation can definitely be tarnished slightly because people will have the impression that we're just moving these cars to a different continent that is less developed. However, I wouldn't define the African continent as less developed just because their CO2 emissions are at a higher rate. We're abiding by their laws, we're not breaking any rules, and we're just pushing the cars to that continent so that they can have more customers.
Talk us through how you would deal with the socio-economic impact that is going to come with selling the volume segment. Because I think I would imagine that if you look at who you employ in the organization, most of your employees would be sitting in that segment because that is where the production volumes are high. So how do you plan to deal with that? And how do you plan to deal with the fallout with the trade unions?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question, the others take. So the first part, talking about the employees and human resource and whatever. So if you look at our report to the physical copy, you'll see that we speak about how working in line with trade unions to figure out ways in which we can lay off some of these people. Ideally, we also understand that we're a massive company. So we can also kind of change the position from taking people from different segments and trying to integrate into other elements of our company. So that is our recommendation regarding employee-facing, working with trade unions to see how we can lay them off, to figuring out other ways in which we can integrate some of them into already existing.
So that means that we're not just reducing the number of cars that we produce, but we're actually producing more premium cars and super premium cars to make up for the loss that we're making in the volume segment, which means that all of those employees will start working for the premium and super premium segments.
I didn't hear your answer, Mpho, on the socio-economic impact.
So I was speaking about, okay, let me just understand. It was centered around how we're going to deal with those employees who we now no longer be employing. Am I
The
correct?
social impact and the economic impact of laying off that many people.
Okay, can you elaborate by social impact so that I answer what in specific?
So I
So that
think,
I can-
so for instance, in the South African context, we're
Yes.
sitting with 30% unemployment.
Yes.
So if you're going to be selling that volume or that segment of the organization, it means that the majority of your employees may be laid off. And I hear the compelling case you're making around taking some of the employees to some of the segments that you're going to be keeping.
Okay.
But we cannot afford laying off more people because, it just further constrains the economy.
Okay.
So that social impact of having more people unemployed and the further drain, on the fiscus, as it were.
Okay. So ideally, as a company, we cannot solve every problem. But ideally, what I'm thinking is that another way that we could go about it is that the company that we're selling off our volume segment to, we can figure out negotiations on how they can integrate our employees because they already have the skill set and understanding of how we already been managing this brand. So I think that could be another way, talking to the company which we're selling it to, figure out the way. If not, to then figuring out with trade unions and other ways. But ideally, I don't think we can solve every problem. Would like to, but yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Can you please talk us through how or unpack the 160 billion euros of hidden value that you mentioned in your presentation? And can you please also talk us through some of the considerations that you would take when you are planning to close down the volume segment?
Okay, for the $160 billion, that comes from the case study and the fact that they'll be focusing on the segments that are most profitable, being the premium and the super premium segments. By accelerating these segments, they can produce more cars and sell more cars at a higher price, which will be able to produce more profit for them.
And I think just thinking about the second part of your question, I think there are a lot of other implications, such as once we close down the firm, what happens to the firm? How are we going to deal around such things? So from the top of my head, what I'm thinking is that can we consult on that quickly? So I think given our understanding of our profit objective, so what we can do possibly, two ways that we could go about it, is that ideally the company that which will be selling our volume segment could buy their already existing firms. If not, what we can do is find which, because we're such a massive whatever, find which other volumes that do not have the same capacity, which we can still produce in that firm. Because ideally we've got now more space to produce more units of our products. So ideally, if the company that which you're selling to does not decide to buy the firm, the already existing firm, and use their own private whatever, we can figure out ways in which we can use our already existing, already manufacturing to see how we can use that space to increase our volume. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Hi team, thank you very much for your presentation. You've definitely got your own style. I would like to just unpack that 160 a little more. I have got a couple of other questions, but I heard quite a general answer there, but I would like to better understand how the company would literally be saving 160 billion. Yeah, that's a lot of money. So how did you get to that figure? What is it made up of?
So from understanding our presentation, the 160 value is the hidden value that we speak about.
Yeah, if you go to the first slide.
First slide, okay, let's go to the first slide. So then.
But in the meantime, go ahead and unpack it. It'll take a while.
And
there you go. Okay. VW is missing out on potential 160 billion.
So it's the hidden value, which is in the.
In other words, you're saying they could make another 160 billion.
Yes.
So please unpack that for me. Where does that come from? Over what period of time?
So it is argued in the case study that if they slim down their portfolio, $160 billion could be produced in the future. We're not given a time range. We're just working off of the case study and the resources that we were given. But we believe that this is because instead of selling cars that are less profitable, being the volume segments, they'll be producing more cars in the premium and super premium
Great.
segments, which will produce more profits.
Okay. I am going to just ask one more question. In your move to centralize all, what do you think are the downsides of that? Actually, no. Let me leave that question because it's in fact been covered twice over here. Thank you very much. Cheers.